Hello and welcome to part 2 of Learn Google Tag Manager by Example. This part 2 is for really if you want to take your Google Tag Manager to the next level. We're going to be covering some fairly advanced stuff such as the data layer, implementing custom tags, scroll tracking, e-commerce transactions, tracking those in Google Analytics, and tracking form drop-off. So I'm giving you these examples not because they're necessarily everything you need to be able to do with Google Tag Manager, but if you understand the basics of how to do these things, then when you want to put your own tags on, everything should make sense. So without further ado, let's get started on part 2 of Learn Google Tag Manager by Example. In some cases, you'll want to create a variable from a value which is present on the page. But this isn't a value which Google Tag Manager picks up by default. So in order to get that value into a tag or into a variable, you need to first of all scrape it out of the page. Here's an example right here. I'm going to pretend this is an order confirmation page. And on that page, we've got a transaction ID and a transaction revenue. And in the code, you'll see that the developers have very kindly surrounded these values with a span tag which has an ID. So the transaction ID is surrounded by a TID and the revenue is surrounded by the value of revenue. If you have something like this, it makes it very easy to scrape into Google Tag Manager. I'll show you it doesn't have to be ID, you can also use classes, but for the moment we're going to pick these values up. So here we go, we're going to go to the trigger screen and we're going to create a new user-defined variable called transaction ID. And now as before we were using some of these values, so I've got a fair few options here as we saw in the first half of this tutorial, but today what we're going to do is we're going to pick up one from the where is it? The DOM element. So the DOM is this domain object model, which basically stands for the HTML on the page. And GTM can look through all of those DOMs and pick up the values we need. So we've got two choices here. We can pick up by ID or we can pick up by CSS selector. In our case, because we have good markup with the ID specified, I can just use that, set this to ID, set the element ID to TID, and now the value that is contained within that ID is being picked up. You could also choose to pick up an attribute name. So if we had an attribute in here, as well as ID, let's say we had something like, I don't know, a data attribute, we could pick that up as well by entering the value here, but for the moment we just want TID. So let's save that. I'm going to do one more for revenue. As well, exactly the same thing. It's coming from a DOM element, and we use the word revenue because, as you can see here, revenue is the ID that we want to pick up. So we'll save that, and I'll preview this container. And now, if I reload this page, we'll see the GTM debugger pop up. So here we go. We're now on the page again. Look in the variables tab, and you'll see right here we have now revenue and transaction ID being pulled in correctly. Right, let's do one more example. Let's suppose we want to pull in the date here, the date of this post. Let's view the source and have a look if there is anything that we could use. Actually, I'm not going to view the source. I'm going to use the built-in inspect tool within Chrome, which is very helpful. We've got the elements here, and I can see that the date is surrounded by this meta-date class. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to pick up that value, and just to demonstrate, you don't have to necessarily have an ID, and you can access things via CSS selectors. So this is going to be post date. Once again, we're pulling this from a DOM, but this time instead of the ID, we're going to use a CSS selector, and it was span.metadate. All right, so let's save that. Again, just to make make sure everything's working, I'm going to refresh that, refresh the page, And let's have a look. Often it takes a few goes to get this right, especially if you're not that familiar with CSS selectors. But we can see there now, post date, we have that value there. So what's the point of doing this? Well, sometimes you just need some values in a tag or a trigger, and those values you don't have in the data layer, which we're going to come on to, or you don't have them easily accessible via the GTM standard way of picking up variables. So you don't have it in a cookie, it's not in the URL, and so on and so forth. So we just scrape it out of the page. The downside of doing this, of course, is that if the developers go ahead and change the HTML, they change the IDs of elements, they change the classes, our tracking is going to break. So I would only advise doing this method in rare cases, or if you really need to get things done and before you've put the data layer in place. Otherwise, I would highly suggest that you put all this information into the data layer. Again, don't worry, we're going to be coming on to what the data layer is in a second. Sometimes there will be marketing tags that you want to add which are not in the default list that GTM gives you. Facebook, the Facebook pixel would be an example of this. They don't have a template here. So what you do in that case is you would choose custom HTML and you would type in the code that Facebook gives you, and just in here you can write any HTML, but in this case I'm writing JavaScript. So I could, for example, log something to the console like that. All right, so again, this is just like any other tag. It has a trigger, and I can call this custom log. Okay, so this is going to fire on every page and print something out to the console window. So let's open up the console window and refresh this page. And you can see that our message is printed out there. So most of the time, custom tags are great for, as I say, adding any marketing tags which are not in the default library, or they're very handy if you want to do some custom JavaScript. So sometimes I will write jQuery in here to manipulate the contents of the page or to set up some things on the page if the developers haven't done it. This is also the one you want to be most careful of, because if you're writing custom JavaScript, the chances are higher that you're going to make a mistake and cause problems on your website. So if you are willing to use this and write your own JavaScript, do triple check that the code is not breaking anything else on your site once you're done. In this section, we're going to place a Facebook marketing pixel onto our website and configure it. The first thing you need to do is go to your Facebook Ads Manager and create the base code. So the base code looks like this. There are plenty of tutorials on how to do that. It's fairly simple. I'm just going to copy all of that to the clipboard, and then we're going to go back to our Tag Manager, and I can create a new tag called Facebook Base Tag. This is going to be a custom HTML tag, and now I'm just going to paste in the code. We don't have to add the script tags in this case because we've already got them around here. So obviously yours will differ, your pixel ID will differ to mine. I'm just going to set this as 1234 for the moment, because I don't want this data going to my real Facebook account. And you can notice there we've got one of the track page views set up already, and we want this to be fired on every page. So that's step one. The second step is to decide which of these actions you want to record. By default, the Facebook pixel only records page views, but sometimes you might want to do these special things such as adding to cart, initiating checkout, adding payment info, making a purchase, someone becoming a lead, etc., etc. So what are we going to do? Well, in our case, we're going to do two things. We're going to do a lead and we're going to do made a purchase. So let's start with lead first. Now I'm going to define a lead as when someone fills in my contact us form. Okay, so once this is submitted, we want to fire this Facebook pixel. So we've already got this GA form submitted event. We've already got the trigger form submitted, so we can capitalize on that. So let's create a new tag called Facebook lead. This again is going to be a custom HTML tag. I'm going to surround the code in script because it needs to be. It's JavaScript code. Otherwise, this will be interpreted as HTML if you don't surround this with script. And what's our trigger going to be? Well, our trigger is going to be form submitted. Now, the one thing we need to do is to make sure that this code fires after our Facebook base tag, because we need the JavaScript library, the Facebook pixel library, to have loaded before this fires. If this fired first, there's a chance our tag won't be tracked correctly, or our lead won't be tracked correctly. So what we're going to do is, in the options here, under advanced settings, there's this thing called enable custom, not that one either. It's tag sequencing here. So what we want to make sure is we want to make sure that a tag fires before this tag. And the tag that we want to make sure fires before this one is the base tag. All right. And if the base tag fires, we don't want to fire this Facebook lead tag. So this will ensure that we've got the options set up correctly so that our base tag fires and then this tag fires. It has to be in that order. So let's save that and let's preview this. Actually, we're not going to preview it just yet. We're going to also then add the made a purchase. So this is exactly the same, except my purchase page is going to be this one here. I'm going to pretend this is our purchase page. In the previous section, we've already picked up the revenue value, which we're going to need as well. So let's create this tag, Facebook order completed. Once again, it's a custom HTML tag. We surround the code with a script tag, and we need to replace this value here with our revenue value. Now, handily, we've already scraped that out of the page and into a variable called revenue, so we can use that right away. I'm in England, so I'm going to change this to British pounds. And once again, we need to make sure that this tag fires under a specific set of circumstances. So fire a tag before this one, and we want to make sure that the Facebook base tag fires first. All right. And now the trigger, when do we want this to be fired? Well, I've already created this order placed trigger. If we have a look at that, it's very simple. Let's have a look at it now. So it's just page path starts with this value. All right, so I've just created a new trigger for page view and page path starting with that value, and that value is the page path of this page. So let's save that. We've now got both our tags in place. We've got the Facebook base tag and also the two tags to indicate to Facebook that events have happened. So first of all, let's refresh the order confirmation page. And we can have a look here. We've got the Facebook base tag has fired and the order completed tag has fired as well. And you'll notice that our value of £99 has been injected in there. So we've scraped it out of the page and injected it into the tag. Now let's check our contact us one is working. Let's put in this. All right, let's submit this. And you can see there our Facebook lead tag has fired now as well. So that's how easy it is to install the Facebook marketing pixels when you have Google Tag Manager. And of course, you can go through and do all of these other stuff, all of these other types of events should you want to as well. If you've been involved in digital marketing at all in the last 5 years or so, you will have heard, or probably will have heard, this term, the data layer. So let me now clarify what a data layer is and why it is so important for Google Tag Manager. Imagine that you want to track something in Google Analytics or track an interaction on the website which is not covered by Google Tag Manager's auto track feature. Let me give you some examples. Maybe if you moused over an image, or if a div pop-up appeared, or if a chat window appeared, or you've got non-standard forms, or a user logs in, or you want to track people scrolling down the page. These are all things which the GTM does not track by default because the browser isn't giving off those signals, so GTM can't read them. So that's problem number one. How do we do that? How do we fire tags based on people doing those kind of interactions? The second problem is, imagine you have a tag which requires a dynamic value. Let's take the Facebook conversion pixel. Now this value, this tag requires a revenue value because Facebook wants to know how much someone has spent so that it can create a valid ROI for you in your reporting. So you need to know how much someone has spent, and this value, presumably if you're an e-commerce site, the value of your transactions will change every time. If you just sold one product, then that's absolutely fine. You could hard code a value in here when you create the tag, but more often than not, these values are going to change over time. So how do we get that information into the tag? Obviously we can create a variable, but where does the variable in GTM get the information from? You probably guessed it by now, but the answer to both of those questions is to use the data layer. The data layer is a JavaScript object within an HTML page which holds information about the page and a user's interactions and can be read by any marketing tools such as Google Tag Manager. Okay, it's a way of getting access to information which we wouldn't otherwise have. So let me repeat that. The data layer is simply a JavaScript variable of type object normally within the page which holds information about the page and potentially the user's interactions so that it can be quickly accessed by Google Tag Manager. Right? It's not that scary. I think people try and make data layers into these big, scary things, but really they're just a bit of information hidden on the page that we can pull into Google Tag Manager when we need to fire events or inject stuff into tags which we wouldn't normally have access to. So let me give you an example here. Let's take the Facebook conversion pixel again. On your order confirmation page, you're going to have the revenue that someone has spent potentially listed on the page. But we also want to have it in the data layer because then we can set up a variable in GTM that reads that value, that revenue value from the data layer. And then we can use that variable in our tag, just as we have used variables in other tags. So let's now dive into the browser and see if we can find this data layer on the page, because if you have Google Tag Manager implemented, you already have a data layer. So right click on the page and you're going to do inspect in Chrome. This will bring up the Chrome debugger tools and you're going to go to the console window. So in the console window, I'm going to clear all those messages and I'm just going to type in data and then layer with a capital L. Now this is the variable name that GTM gives to its data layer, but data layers can be called anything. It's totally up to you and your developers to decide on that. You can configure GTM to use any type of data layer name, but by default it's set to data layer. And let's have a look in here. This data layer right now contains 2 objects, and each object contains a bit of information. So the first object here is telling me that I wrote the page, and I know that because I did. I know it's to be true. So page post author is a variable and the value is ed. Page post type is a variable and the value is page. And then page post type 2 is a variable and single page is the variable value. Now you won't necessarily have these on your website. You won't necessarily have these variables. You may have other ones. By default, GTM won't have any variables. It's up to your developers to implement the variables you need on that page. The WordPress plugin I'm using at the moment has injected these values automatically. So that's why I've got some extra information here. The next object down, gtm.js. Now this variable called event, this is to show us that Google Tag Manager has started loading. started loading the JavaScript library. So GTM will inject this kind of stuff into it, into the data layer. We don't necessarily need to look at that though. We're more interested in the values which we are pushing to the data layer ourselves. So how do we put more information into this data layer? Well, that comes down really to the developers. The developers have to open up the source code of their page and they have to inject a data layer onto the page. So right at the beginning here, you can see that this WordPress plugin has created a data layer variable and it's pushed these values into the data layer. So again, you have to decide what information is relevant to you and push that into the data layer. And again, this is kind of outside the scope of this tutorial, but you can find lots of information on this. My top recommendation is basically think about your tags, think about what information you need in those tags. If you want a Facebook conversion pixel on your post confirmation page, you need the revenue in the data layer so you can pick it up. Let me give you an example using this data layer here. Imagine that I had a tag and I wanted to inject the author into the tag. I'm going to create a variable called author in GTM to read this value here. All right, so let's see how this works. So head back to Google Tag Manager, go to variables, click new. I'm going to call this author. I'm going to click on variable configuration and I'm going to scroll down to data layer variable because this is where the variable is coming from. And I'm going to give it the name. Now we have a look, the name was page post author. So I'm going to type that in. It has to be exactly as it was in the data layer, the exact same name, page post author. Hit save. And now let's preview this and see what happens. So I've previewed that. I'm going to refresh this page. We should see the GTM debugger pop up. I'm going to go to the variables tab and click on window loaded and then variables. And we'll see here our author variable is now there and it's correctly reading the value ed from the data layer. And again, we would go through this process for every single variable we wanted to pick up within the data layer. Once you've done that, you can then change your tags, you can inject your variables into your tags as we did before, and you'll get the information you want. So that is the power of the data layer. I highly recommend that you think through exactly what you want in your data layer. I've done other videos on some examples of this. I've written blog posts on it as well. You can also use datalayerdoctor.com, the app there that I built, which will help you create a data layer for Google Analytics or anything else. And I also give a shout out to the Universal Variable Specs by Qubit, which I am highly fond of as well. So go check those out. By default, Google Analytics does not record transactions. In order to track transactions, the traditional way of doing it is you needed to put some JavaScript code on the sales confirmation page. And that code would look like this. So a whole long set of code. This code would be injected by the developers, and you can see here we're adding a product. Here are details about the product, and then we're setting an action to purchase, and here are details about the purchase. So if you're implementing this in GTM, you can do it a slightly different way. You still have to get developers to put some code onto the website, but the code they put on is slightly different. The code they need to put on you can find here, and you get here by searching for Enhanced E-commerce Google Tag Manager. So notice the difference here. Here you were calling the Google Analytics library directly, but here you are doing a data layer push and you're sending a custom event called e-commerce, and you need to set out these variables in exactly this structure. If you do and you have this on your website, and again, you need to get your developers to do this, or you can find plugins for popular content management systems such as WooCommerce or Magento. They generally have plugins for this. once you have this on your sales confirmation page, implementing e-commerce is a doddle. All you have to do is go back into your Google Tag Manager base tag, so the GA base tag, edit the tag, and under more settings, e-commerce, you want to enable e-commerce, and you just click use data layer. Save that, and provided you have that exact specifications of the data layer on your sales confirmation page, you will start recording data into GA. It's as easy as that. So if you have an e-commerce site, do make sure that you have implemented this data layer, because not only is it useful for Google Analytics, but again, if you imagine that scenario where we want to have a Facebook marketing tag and you want to pick up the revenue, well, that's great because it's in this value here, so we can just pull that out and set it. In this section, we're going to track each of these banners and when someone clicks on them and send an event to Google Analytics. Now, I could do this using the auto event feature of Google Tag Manager, because when someone clicks on them, a browser event of click will be detected, and we could do that. But to show you how powerful the data layer is, I'm going to use I'm not going to use auto event tracking, and instead I'm going to use the data layer. And when we send this data to Google Analytics, I also want to pick up the name of these banners, banner A or banner B, so that I get an understanding of which banners people are more interested in and more clicking on. So first of all, let's have a look at the post here. So this is the post, and I'm going to have a look at the source code. I'm going to scroll all the way down, and you'll see right at the bottom here, I've written some jQuery. Obviously, if you're a marketer, this might be beyond you, but the idea is that you get your developers to implement some jQuery so that when a banner is clicked, you're going to do a data layer.push, and you're going to push this data to Google Tag Manager. To the data layer. So when these banners are clicked, we're going to set the event variable to be banner clicked, and I'm going to set the banner name to be the actual name of the banner. This is again a variable which is going to be replaced. Okay, so let me show you that working in practice. Let me load up the debugger and refresh this page. Okay. All right, so head over to the data layer tab. You can see that we've got some values of the data layer already being picked up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one of these banners. Okay, and what you'll see here is that because we pushed the event value of banner clicked, we now have GTM recording that event in the data layer. Okay, so look at our values for the data layer now. We've now got event, banner clicked, banner name, banner A. This time I'm going to click banner B. All right, and now look at the values. The event name, banner clicked, but banner name has changed to banner B. And that is all because of this code here. We're pushing to the data layer, the event, banner clicked, and the variable name, banner name. Okay, so you can do this for absolutely anything. If someone scrolls to the bottom of the page, you could do a data layer push, and you could set this to be scroll and scroll percentage 100%. Okay, you can think of this as a tool, an extremely useful tool of tracking absolutely anything. You might want to do data layer.push. The event would be purchase, and in that in the variables you could put in all the kind of stuff around what has been purchased. So again, I'm going to do a quick example for that because I know this can be confusing for people who are not that familiar with JavaScript code, but that's what this is. So I'm going to type this in. So let's pretend now that instead of this being a banner, this was the sales confirmation page. I could set this to be order made, and I can list out loads of values here. So maybe the revenue was $9.99 and the transaction ID was 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Hit enter, and now let's have a look at my data layer. You can see we've got this order made event coming in, and the data layer now shows our updated variables. So as someone interacts with the page, the data layer can grow. All you have to do is you have to define what data you want to push to the data layer and then push it. So how do we use this value, right? Let's refresh this page and go back to what it was before. So I'm going to click on banner A, and you can now see we've got this banner clicked event. So I'm going to create a new trigger which only fires when GTM receives this banner clicked event. But I also want to pick up the name of the banner and set that as a variable, banner A. So let's get on and do that. So first up, I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to create a new variable called banner name. And under configuration, I'm going to set this to a data layer variable and give it the name banner name, because that's what we called it in the data layer. Okay. Again, I'm going to quickly show you that this is working. I'm going to preview it. I'm going to preview the page, refresh the page, come back into Google Tag Manager, click on a banner, and now when we check the variables table, you can see that we have banner name variable set to banner B, which is exactly what we want. So we created the variable. Next up, we're going to set the trigger. Create a new trigger called banner clicked. The trigger configuration, as I said before, we could do this as an all elements click, but for the sake of showing you the power of custom events, I'm going to do it this way. Okay, so this is a custom event, and as you can see, the name here, banner clicked, that's what we've set it to. So banner clicked gets put in there. Save that. And finally, we need our tag. So I'm going to create my tag, GA banner clicked event. Tag configuration, just as before, it's going to be universal analytics. Tracking ID, we've already got set in a variable. This is an event. I'm going to call this interactions. The actions banner clicked. The label is going to be the banner name, and that's a variable I've set up. So there we go. And the triggering is going to happen when the banner is clicked. So we save that. I'm going to preview it. With any luck, if I refresh this page, you'll now see that nothing is happening. Tags not fired on the page, quite a few. I'm going to click, and now GA banner clicked event has fired. And if I go into this, you can see that the event label is correctly being set to banner A. I'm going to click banner B now. See, we've got a new event. Banner clicked event has fired again, and this time it's set to banner B. So just like that, we've managed to set up event tracking on these two banners using data pushed to the data layer. And this is the most powerful feature of GTM. So I would encourage you to really define what specifications you want for the data layer. And if you're building your website, always push events that you think are of interest and data to the data layer, because you never know when you're going to use them in the future. That way, you'll always be able to create tags. You'll always be able to get your marketing tags in place and the triggers right, because you have all this information in the data layer about what the user is doing on the page. Let me give you one more example of using the data layer. So we've got this contact us form, and I want to know if this form is too long. Are people not contacting me because they don't get to the end of the form? This is quite a common question, especially not necessarily for contact us forms, but when you're signing up for an account, you want it to make that process as smooth and efficient for people as possible. So knowing when someone drops out of your form is quite important. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use Google Analytics, and every time someone enters their cursor into one of these fields, I'm going to send an event to Google Analytics telling me what the field was, so that we can work out if we get 100 people in this field and then 90 in this one and then 80 in this one, it'll give us a drop-off rate. So how do we do this? Well, the theory is this: whenever someone clicks into one of these, the browser can detect this. So we're going to write some JavaScript code which detects this activity and then pushes an event to the data layer called form field entered. We're then going to set up GTM to listen for that event and fire the tag to GA. So in my WordPress, I've written some code here. Here is the JavaScript, and you can see that it's very similar to the JavaScript we had previously, except I'm looking for my form, the input fields of my form. Whenever they're focused on, I pick up the name of the field, which is stored in the name attribute in the HTML, and then I'm pushing an event called form field entered, and I'm setting the field name value to name. Okay, so let's have a look at that in practice. I'm going to publish this. And refresh my page so I can see the debugger. And now as I click through each of these, you'll notice we get a new event down here called form field entered. You can see they're all popping up. And then within the data layer, we can see that the name is being set to the field name. Okay, so each one of these events has a different form field name. As I go through, you can see these change. All right, so how do we do this? So we've now got this event being recorded, and we've got this new variable which we need to set up in GA called field name. So let's go to variables. I'm going to create a new user-defined variable called field name. Again, this is coming from the data layer. It's going to be called field name. Again, I like to keep the names of the variables in the data layer the same as the name of the variables here. They don't have to be the same, but I like that for convention and for debugging purposes. Next up, we need a trigger, and this is going to be called form field entered. This is a custom event, and the custom event is form field entered. Why is it form field entered? Because that is the value we've specified in our data layer push. So there it is, and I wanted this to fire on all forms, all fields. And finally, we need a tag. So I'm going to create a new tag, GA form field entered event. Tag configuration, this is going to be universal analytics. The tracking ID, again, we have in a property. It's going to be event. Call this interactions form field entered, and the label is going to be the field name, and trigger form field entered, which we've just set up. Save that, preview it to make sure it's working, and refresh this page. And now I'm going to start going through each one. You can see form field entered is fired twice, 3 times. And if I have a look in my GA, I can see interactions form field entered. Let's drill down into this event, and you can see now your email, your subject. These are all being tracked. Click through them a few more. You can see they're all coming in. We're tracking each one. So I can see at a glance now in my events report, I'll be able to tell which of these fields people are getting stuck on. And obviously this is the very basics. You can use this to be much more sophisticated. You might not want to do just when someone enters, but you might, if they spend more than 10 seconds, for example, looking at this field, then you might want to fire an event saying, oh, there might be a problem with this. So this is just the basics. I'm just showing you here the power of the custom event. Something else you might want to do is to know when someone scrolls to the bottom of your page. This is great for long content articles when you want to know if someone's read the whole thing, rather than by default just knowing that they've loaded the page. So we're going to do that using by pushing data into the data layer. And if you're using the Google Tag Manager for WordPress plugin that I mentioned in part 1 of this tutorial, you'll notice there is a scroll tracking tab. So all you need to do is just enable this and save it. And then when you go to your site, you'll notice that you get a few more events being pushed to the data layer if we scroll down, you'll see we've got start reading, content bottom. I ignore that one because it's not set up correctly, but start reading, and when I get to the bottom of the page, we get page bottom. So we've got start reading and page bottom, and page bottom is the one we want to trigger an event on to say that this page has been read fully. So if you don't use this WordPress plugin, then obviously you'll have to get your developers to write some code so that when you get to the bottom of this page, they will push this event to the data layer. But because we were using WordPress, we can use this event that they've set up for us. So let's create that now. Let's create a trigger. And this trigger is going to be called reached page bottom. And this is going to be a custom event with the event name of that. Okay, let's save that. And then all we have to do is once again create a GA trigger, reached page bottom event. This is going to be, again, a universal analytics tag. I've got my tracking ID set up as a variable. In it goes. This is an event, and I'm going to call this interactions. The action is reach page bottom, and I'm going to give the label a blank value. You could choose to put in the page URL here, as so, or the page path. That's an option, but GA, whenever you send an event to it, also automatically tracks what page you're on. So this is unnecessary, but we'll leave it in there for the moment. And triggering, well, reached page bottom. Save that. Let's publish that. Refresh our page. We'll now see there's nothing fired, or there's base tag fired, nothing else. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and you'll see that the reached page bottom event then fires. Another way you can measure scroll depth is by this plugin by parsnip.io. So head to scrolldepth.parsnip.io, and you're going to download their library. Just copy it straight out of the browser window, and we're going to create a new tag called library. LB stands for library scroll depth plugin. This is going to be a custom HTML tag, and you're just going to paste in the scroll depth plugin as so. Obviously, remember to put it within a script tag like that. And we're going to fire this on all pages. Now, by default, if you look through the code, you'll notice that this actually sends some events to Google Analytics straight away. So it doesn't really use the data layer. Now, I like to have more control over what my plugin is doing. If you are absolutely fine with the naming conventions it's using, then you can just leave it as it is. But personally, I want to change a few of these things. So let's see what it does by default. So let's refresh this, load the page. Okay, and you can see that these two are already ones we had already. So it's not much is happening at the moment. So once you've got that, you need to initialize the plugin, and the way you initialize it is with this script right here. Okay, so we're going to put that in as well. Now, obviously, you can externally host this file. You don't need to paste it all in here, but for the sake of convenience, we're just going to do it like this. So this is the plugin above here, and this is it being initialized. So let's save that again. Let's preview this and have a look at what is going on. All right, so this time, as we scroll down, you see we get some data being fired in here. We've got scroll distance, and you'll notice that the data layer is being updated with this event scroll distance, the event category scroll depth, percentage, and the event label. And if I go back to the top of the page, refresh the page, You'll see that in the data layer, nothing's happened yet. We're going to scroll down. Okay, and then we get a scroll timing event and a scroll distance event as we get to 25% of the page. Keep going down. Now we get a 50%. Keep going down. 75%. Until we get to the bottom where we get 100%. So what we're going to do is we're now going to pick up these values and use them in our GTM to send the data to GA. So let's create that now. We're going to create a new trigger. This is going to be called scroll depth reached. And the trigger is, it's going to be a custom event, and the name is, I want to put that whole thing in, we just want to put in scroll timing. Again, capitalization is important here, just like that. Save that. Perfect. We also want to set up a couple of variables because I want to pick up the event label. I want to know what percentage of the way down someone scrolled. So let's create a new variable called event label. And this is going to come from the data layer. Again, it's called event label. Save that. Perfect. So we've now got event label. We've got that value being picked up. And I don't personally need to pick up these event category and event action. I'm happy using my own values, but if you want to pick those up, you can. But instead, I'm just gonna write the values in myself. So we've got GA scroll depth reached. This is going to be a universal analytics tag. Tracking ID is the GA property ID. It's going to be an event. Let's call it interactions. The category, scroll depth reached, and the label is going to be the event label, like that. So this will inject how far down the page they've reached. And the triggering is our custom event, which we created earlier, scroll depth reached. Let's publish this or preview this even and have a look at what is going on now. Okay, so now we don't have any tags firing yet. As I scroll down the page, you can see that the scroll depth plugin has fired. And we've got a scroll depth reached event. If we look at the values, we can see that we've got the event label set to 25%. So that's perfect. Let's keep going down again. Again, it's fired 2 times now, and you can see once again the event label has reached 50%. So that's perfect. That's what we want. And as we keep going down, we see we get more of these events being fired 3 times, and finally 4 times. With 100%. So that's how you can track how far down the page a user is getting. And there it is, everything you need to know about Google Tag Manager to get your marketing tags implemented in record time. I really hope you've got some great benefits out of this course and you've fully enjoyed it. If you have, please do drop me an email at ed@metricmogul, that's mogul.co.uk, with some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching. Take care.